When silence said everything, do you know what happens when two people carry the same kind of silence inside them? Do you know how connection can grow without a single word being spoken? Do you believe some friendships are built not by time, but by shared pain? The studio lights were brighter than usual that morning. Sandra Bullock stood near the edge of the stage, her hands folded quietly as the director went over cues for a new interview segment. She was calm on the outside, but her mind was far from still. Every time she took a breath, she felt the weight of months she had tried to hide behind laughter and polite smiles. Then, Keanu Reeves walked in, not loudly, not dramatically, just the way he always did. Quietly, and with a kind of presence that made everything else slow down for a second. He greeted everyone, his voice low and kind. But when his eyes found Sandra, something unspoken passed between them. No one else could see it, but the air changed slightly. It was as if they both remembered something, an unfinished conversation, a shared moment that had never truly ended. The cameras began rolling. Questions were asked. Laughter filled the air. But underneath the rehearsed answers, there was something raw. When the host teased them about how comfortable they looked together, Sandra smiled and glanced at Keanu, half amused and half guarded. Keanu returned the look, a hint of warmth behind his calm face. They didn't say much, but they didn't have to. The truth was, behind their easy smiles, both were quietly rebuilding themselves from losses that the world rarely saw. Sandra had recently taken a long pause from public life after a deeply personal loss. And Keanu, who had always carried a quiet sadness behind his gentle eyes, knew exactly what that silence felt like. He didn't try to fix it, he just stayed close. And sometimes that was enough. After the show ended, the two of them stayed behind as the crew packed up. Sandra leaned against a wall, her hair falling slightly over her face. Keanu noticed. He didn't say anything at first, but when she finally whispered, "Some days it just feels too heavy," he nodded slowly and said, "You don't have to lift it alone." His tone wasn't dramatic, just real. Sandra looked at him, surprised at how simple his words were and how deeply they landed. That night, as she drove home, those words echoed in her mind. Maybe that was why. The next morning, when her phone buzzed with a message from him saying, "Coffee later?" she said yes before she even thought about it. The coffee shop they met at was small and quiet, the kind of place where no one stared too long. Keanu arrived early and chose a corner table near the window. He always preferred corners, quiet, safe, observant places. When Sandra arrived, she carried that same warmth she always had. But her smile was softer this time, more honest. Their talk started light, movies, old memories, the absurd things fans say, but slowly, it turned real. Sandra spoke about how fame could sometimes make you feel invisible. Keanu listened, really listened, not waiting for his turn to talk. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't advice. It was understanding. He told her about the nights he drove with no destination. Just to think, to breathe, to find peace in motion. Hours passed unnoticed. When they finally stepped outside, the evening light painted the sky gold and soft pink. Sandra felt lighter. Keanu, too, seemed calmer. As they said goodbye, a quiet understanding lingered between them. Something was growing. Not romance yet, not friendship exactly, but something pure, something both of them needed. Over the next few weeks, they began seeing each other more often. Sometimes they were spotted at quiet dinners, sometimes just walking, laughing softly as if the world around them didn't matter. People started noticing. Tabloids wrote stories. Fans speculated. Interviews turned awkward when reporters hinted at how close they've become. But what no one understood was that their closeness wasn't born from gossip or headlines. It was built in the spaces where they didn't have to pretend. Still, that kind of closeness always attracts attention. One evening, as Sandra left a charity event, a photographer shouted something that made her stop mid-step. The question wasn't cruel, but it was cutting. "Sandra, are you and Keanu finally admitting you're more than friends?" The flashbulbs went off. Her smile faded for half a second, and Keanu, standing just behind her, noticed. He gently reached for her hand, guiding her through the crowd without saying a word. That single gesture said everything. When they reached the car, she looked at him with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled slightly. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "Real friends don't walk away when the light turns harsh." That night, as she sat alone, she replayed that line again and again. Maybe, she thought, this was what it felt like when someone truly saw you. Not your fame, not your image, but the person you really were when no one was watching. Days later, an unexpected phone call changed the rhythm of their connection. A journalist had managed to twist their simple friendship into a story that felt invasive and personal. Sandra's team advised her to keep distance to avoid more speculation. She tried. But silence never sits well when something meaningful is growing underneath. Keanu didn't text her for a few days, respecting the space she needed. But when he finally did, the message was simple. "Sometimes distance protects the truth," he wrote, and then, after a long pause, another message came. "But it doesn't mean I'm gone." Her eyes filled with quiet emotion. She typed back slowly, "Then maybe truth is worth waiting for." And as the screen faded to black in that moment, one thing became clear. Their story wasn't about fame or rumors or the noise of the world. It was about two souls quietly finding home in each other's silence. But what neither of them knew yet was that life was about to test that connection in ways neither expected. When the world started watching, have you ever noticed how real connection grows quiet when the noise gets loud? Do you know what happens when the truth becomes too beautiful for headlines? Sometimes the world tries to name something it doesn't understand. The weeks that followed were strange for both Sandra and Keanu. What began as a calm friendship built on trust slowly turned into a public story written by strangers. Magazine covers showed their smiles taken out of context, and talk shows made jokes that turned their quiet bond into entertainment. At first, Sandra laughed it off. She'd been in Hollywood long enough to know how stories are made. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was because it involved the one person she truly trusted to be real in a world full of masks. Keanu noticed her unease. One morning, as they met for breakfast at a quiet spot far from the city, he looked at her and said softly, "We can't control what they see, but we can protect what's real." His words settled deep inside her. She realized he wasn't just talking about their friendship, he was talking about how they lived. Both had survived loss, fame, and loneliness by choosing silence over chaos, and that silence was now under attack by noise. As they ate, Sandra's phone kept buzzing with messages from her manager. "Avoid appearing in public together," one message read. "It's confusing the audience." She sighed, locked her phone, and looked at Keanu. "They think being seen with you is bad for my image," she said, half smiling but with tired eyes. Keanu didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned forward and said quietly, "Then maybe your image needs a break too." His tone wasn't defiant, it was sincere. He wasn't trying to fight the system. He was reminding her that peace mattered more than perception. Over the next few days, Sandra found herself thinking about what he'd said. She realized that Keanu's calmness wasn't passivity, it was strength. He didn't rush to defend himself. He didn't try to prove anything. He just lived his truth. Then something unexpected happened. One evening, Sandra received an invitation to a film gala honoring Keanu for his contributions to charity and cinema. She hesitated at first. Attending would mean facing the cameras again, and the rumors. But something in her heart told her she needed to be there. Not as an actress, not as a friend in hiding, but as someone who wanted to stand beside a person who had quietly stood by her. The night of the gala was full of golden light and soft music. People in elegant clothes moved around the room, their voices blending like a tide. When Keanu arrived, he looked as humble as ever, wearing the same calm expression he always carried. He greeted everyone politely, never pretending to be more than he was. Sandra entered moments later. The room went quieter than anyone expected. The flashes began almost instantly. Every camera turned, every whisper carried her name alongside his. But she didn't hide. She walked straight toward him, smiling gently. Keanu noticed her before the others did. For a second, his eyes softened. When she reached him, he gave a small nod. "You didn't have to come," he said quietly. I wanted to, she replied. That moment, simple, honest, human, became the photograph that traveled across the world by morning. Two people standing close, not pretending, not acting, just present. The next day, reporters flooded social media with speculations. Talk shows turned that brief moment into a full debate about love, friendship, and loyalty. Yet amidst all the noise, one interview clip stood out. When asked about the rumors, Keanu simply said, "Some people meet not to start something new, but to help each other heal what's old." That line went viral not because it was romantic, but because it was true. Fans everywhere felt something deeper behind those words. And for Sandra, hearing him say that was like watching someone turn chaos into poetry. But the more public the story became, the harder it was to keep it pure. Brands began offering joint deals. Producers wanted them to star together again, using their connection as marketing fuel. Sandra felt torn between her work and her peace. Keanu, however, kept his distance from the spotlight. One night she called him. Her voice was quiet, heavy with frustration. I feel like they're trying to sell something sacred, she said. Like they want to make profit out of something that doesn't even belong to them. Keanu listened for a while before replying. They can only sell what you give them, he said softly. So maybe stop giving them access to your peace. His words struck her deeply. She realized that his strength wasn't in fighting back. It was in letting go. The next morning, she canceled several interviews. She took a break from public events and focused on small projects that brought her joy. For the first time in months, she felt free. But freedom often comes with unexpected consequences. One afternoon, while Keanu was filming a new independent project far from Los Angeles, Sandra received news that changed everything. One of his motorcycle stunts had gone wrong. No major injuries were confirmed yet, but rumors spread faster than truth ever could. The internet erupted with headlines. Keanu Reeves injured during shoot. Sandra Bullock rushes to see Keanu. Reporters gathered outside her gate before she even decided what to do. She didn't wait for confirmation. She just drove. The road to the filming location felt longer than it should. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know why she was so afraid. It wasn't just about friendship anymore. It was something deeper, something she had been too careful to name. When she arrived, the set was quiet. Paramedics were packing up, and crew members whispered among themselves. When she asked for him, someone pointed toward a small tent near the trailers. She walked quickly, her steps heavy with fear. Inside, Keanu sat on a chair, a bandage on his arm, looking slightly pale but calm as ever. When he saw her, he smiled faintly. You didn't have to come, he said, repeating the same line he'd said at the gala, but this time, her eyes filled with tears. Stop saying that, she whispered. You know I always will. He looked at her for a long moment before saying, Then I guess I'll have to start deserving it. His calm words broke her in ways she didn't expect. She laughed through her tears, realizing that what they had was something that didn't need labels. It just needed truth. As she sat beside him, the world outside their small tent kept buzzing with rumors and noise, but inside everything was quiet. Two people, two souls, sharing silence once again. And yet, neither of them knew that this calm moment was just the eye of a storm that was about to grow bigger than either of them imagined. When silence began to change everything, you ever noticed that the strongest bonds are tested not by distance, but by misunderstanding? Do you know that even kindness can be questioned when the world starts to doubt it? Sometimes what brings people closer is the same thing that tries to tear them apart. In the days after Keanu's accident, the media wouldn't let go of the story. Every news outlet twisted the event into something it wasn't. They said Sandra had rushed into his life, that she was emotionally attached, that their friendship was turning into something more. But behind all the noise, neither of them cared about the headlines. They only cared that he was healing. Keanu was recovering slowly, but he wasn't the kind of man who liked being taken care of. He preferred silence to sympathy. Yet Sandra kept checking in, bringing him food, small notes, quiet company. She didn't hover or demand conversation. She simply showed up. And that made all the difference. One evening, while he was resting at home, she sat by the window watching the city lights. You always choose calm, even when everything is falling apart, she said softly. How do you do that? Keanu looked at her for a long moment before replying. Because reacting doesn't heal anything, he said. But staying kind, even when it hurts, keeps you human. His words hit her harder than she expected. Maybe that was what she had lost somewhere along her path. The calm that comes from acceptance. Over the next week, they spent quiet evenings together, talking about life and the strange ways fame twists truth. They laughed about the absurdity of rumors, but deep down, both knew that the world's obsession with their closeness was starting to change things between them. Sandra began noticing how careful Keanu had become in public. He would avoid standing too close, avoid being photographed with her. He was protecting her, but it felt like distance. One afternoon, when she confronted him gently, he sighed and said, "If stepping back keeps you safe, then I'll take that step." Her voice broke slightly. And what if safety costs peace? He didn't answer, but the silence that followed was heavy. It was the kind of silence that meant something was shifting. Then, an unexpected opportunity arrived. A producer approached them both with a film script written specifically for them, a story about two long-lost friends finding each other again after years of silence. It was raw, emotional, and strangely close to their reality. At first, Sandra laughed at the coincidence, but when she looked at Keanu, she saw hesitation in his eyes. "We can't," he said simply. "Why not?" she asked. "Because everyone will think it's about us," he replied. She paused for a moment. "Maybe that's not a bad thing," she said quietly. Keanu's calm face shifted slightly. He looked down, then back at her. But what if it becomes the only thing they see? Those words stayed with her long after she left his house that night. She realized he wasn't afraid of rumors. He was afraid of losing the purity of something real. For a while, they avoided the topic. They continued living their separate lives, meeting occasionally in quiet cafes, always away from the cameras. But fate has a way of bringing people to crossroads they can't ignore. One day, a video surfaced online, an old behind-the-scenes clip from years ago when they filmed together. It showed them laughing, leaning close, completely unaware of the camera. It was innocent, but the internet made it viral, calling it proof of their hidden love. Within hours, every news outlet replayed it. Sandra's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Her manager urged her to release a statement denying any personal connection. She felt trapped between protecting her career and protecting the truth. So she called Keanu. When he answered, his voice was steady as always. "They'll move on soon," he said. "No, they won't," she replied, her tone tired. "They're feeding on something they don't even understand." There was silence for a few seconds before Keanu spoke again. "Then maybe it's time we stop hiding from the truth ourselves." His words stunned her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we've spent so long proving what we're not," he said softly. "Maybe it's time to just be who we are." For the first time, she couldn't tell whether he meant friendship or something more. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his words in her head. She thought about every moment, the calm coffee talks, the quiet laughter, the hand he reached out when the crowd became too much, the way he looked at her when she didn't have to pretend. Maybe, without realizing it, she had already fallen into something deeper than friendship. A few days later, Sandra arrived unannounced at Keanu's house. He was sitting on the porch, reading, surrounded by the gentle hum of evening. She stood there for a long moment before speaking. "You once said real friends don't walk away when the light turns harsh," she said quietly. "So I'm not walking away now." Keanu looked up, setting his book aside. "Then stay," he said. The simplicity of his answer broke her composure. Tears welled up, not because of sadness, but because of release. She sat beside him, the silence between them soft and full. They didn't talk about love. They didn't need to. Sometimes, presence speaks louder than confession. But while they sat there under the fading sunset, unaware of the world beyond that moment, a car stopped outside the gate. A photographer stepped out quietly, lifting his camera toward the porch. One click, and the flash broke the peace. Keanu turned his head, startled. Sandra froze. In seconds, the man ran back to his car and drove off. They both knew what that meant. By morning, their quiet story would belong to everyone else again. Keanu closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "They'll make this ugly," he whispered. Sandra's hand trembled slightly as she reached for his. "Then let's not let them," she said. But it was already too late. By dawn, the photograph was everywhere. Two people sitting too close, their eyes saying too much. Every network had an opinion. Every voice had a theory. And once again, their truth was buried under the noise. Only this time, something in both of them had changed. They were no longer afraid of being seen together. They were only afraid of what fame could do to something real. As the sun rose, Keanu turned to Sandra and said quietly, "Whatever happens next, don't lose your peace." And she whispered back, "Only if you promise not to lose me." The words hung between them like a fragile truth neither dared to name. And outside, the world waited to see what they would do next. When truth stopped hiding, have you ever noticed that when people finally stop pretending, everything around them starts to test their courage? Do you know that peace doesn't always come in quiet moments, but sometimes through storms that break what's false? Sometimes truth waits for the moment when you have no choice but to stand in it. By the time morning came, the photograph of Keanu and Sandra had already traveled around the world. Every network, every website, every gossip channel ran the same picture with different meanings. Keanu and Sandra caught in private moment. Friends, or something more. The photo that confirms what everyone suspected. Sandra didn't leave her house that day. She sat by the window watching the light shift slowly across the room, reading messages she didn't ask for. Her manager called again and again, warning her to make a statement before the story spun out of control. But she didn't want to deny something that wasn't wrong. She just didn't know how to protect what was still fragile. Keanu, on the other hand, stayed calm as always. He didn't open his phone much, didn't read the noise. Instead, he sent Sandra a short message. "Storms pass faster when you don't chase every thunder." She stared at the message for a long time. His words always found a way to pull her back to stillness. But this time she also felt something else, a quiet ache. She realized that peace with him wasn't just comfort anymore. It was connection. The next day, Sandra's team arranged a press conference for one of her new projects. The timing was terrible, but canceling would only make things worse. As she stood behind the curtain waiting to walk out, she could already hear the reporters whispering about the photo. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from exhaustion. When she stepped onto the stage, flashes filled the room. Questions came faster than she could process. Someone shouted, "Sandra, are you and Keanu Reeves in a relationship?" Another voice followed. "Are the rumors true that you've been seeing each other in secret?" For a moment, she didn't answer. The silence stretched. Everyone waited. Then she smiled faintly and said, "Keanu is one of the kindest people I've ever known. If the world chooses to turn kindness into a headline, that says more about the world than it does about us." The room went quiet. She didn't deny, didn't confirm, just told the truth. After the conference, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't her manager. It was Keanu. His message was simple. "You handled it with grace," she typed back. "I learned that from you." Later that evening, Sandra visited Keanu's house. There were no reporters this time, no cameras, just the faint sound of wind moving through the trees. He opened the door before she could knock twice. They sat outside, the city lights far away, the air calm. "Do you regret not hiding it?" he asked quietly. "No," she said. "I regret hiding for so long." He looked at her, his expression unreadable but soft. Then maybe the truth needed light. That night, something between them changed. Not suddenly. Not with words or confessions, but with understanding. Sometimes love doesn't arrive loudly. It grows quietly until you realize it's already there. Over the next few weeks, they stopped running. They went out for coffee like normal people. They didn't hide behind tinted cars or secret entrances. And though the cameras still followed, their peace was different now. It wasn't about avoiding attention. It was about not letting it control them. But peace never stays untested for long. One evening, while Sandra was preparing for a charity event, she received a call that made her chest tighten. A close friend of hers had sold a private message to a magazine, a message she had once written to Keanu during his recovery after the accident. It wasn't romantic, but it was raw, personal, full of care. Now it was being published as proof of her feelings. She felt betrayed, angry, exposed. She called Keanu immediately. He listened quietly, and when she finished, there was only silence for a few seconds. Then he said softly, "They can print your words, but they'll never understand what they meant." "But doesn't it bother you?" she asked. "It hurts," he admitted. "But I've learned that peace isn't about what happens around us. It's about what we choose not to lose." His calm tone steadied her again. She realized he wasn't just someone she admired. He was someone she needed to remind her who she truly was. The magazine released the story 2 days later. Social media exploded. Opinions filled the air again, some supportive, some cruel. But for the first time, Sandra didn't respond. She stayed silent. Her silence became her shield. And strangely, people began to notice the dignity in that silence. Then, something unexpected happened. During a charity event a week later, Keanu appeared on stage without announcement. He was there to present an award to Sandra for her humanitarian work. The crowd erupted in applause as she walked toward him, surprised, her expression softening when their eyes met. When he handed her the award, he said quietly into the microphone, "Some people shine brighter not because they seek attention, but because they choose kindness when the world gives them every reason not to." The audience stood up in applause. Sandra's eyes filled with emotion. In that moment, it wasn't about rumors or gossip. It was about truth, made visible through grace. After the event, they sat together in the quiet of the backstage area. Sandra leaned her head slightly on his shoulder and whispered, "You didn't have to say that." He smiled faintly. "I know. But sometimes silence isn't enough." Outside, the world was still watching, still talking, still speculating. But inside that small space, there was peace. Real, unbreakable peace between two souls who had finally stopped running. As they sat there, unaware of the cameras still waiting outside, one reporter accidentally captured the moment through a distant reflection, a photograph of them sitting side by side, not posing, not acting, just existing, by morning. That image became the most shared picture of the year, not because it was romantic, but because it looked real. People saw honesty, vulnerability, and care, something the world quietly longed for. But fame has a way of turning truth into challenge. Within days, powerful figures began using their story as an example, some to inspire, others to manipulate. Offers for exclusive interviews and brand deals poured in. Both refused them all. And then came a letter, one that would test everything they had built. It arrived at Sandra's house with no sender name, only a plain envelope. When she opened it, her expression changed slowly from curiosity to shock. She sat down, reading the words over and over. When she finally called Keanu, her voice was trembling. "Someone knows something about us that they shouldn't," she whispered. Keanu's tone was calm, but his eyes darkened. "What does it say?" "It says they'll release something personal if we don't meet their terms." The room went quiet. "Then we find out who they are," Keanu said firmly. "And we face it together." She looked at him, her fear slowly replaced by the same quiet strength he had always carried. And as the night deepened, one thing became clear. The next test wouldn't come from fame or rumor, but from betrayal. When betrayal knocked quietly, do you know how betrayal feels when it comes wrapped in silence instead of noise? Do you know the chill that enters when someone you trusted starts to whisper your truth to the world? Sometimes the biggest storms don't come from enemies, but from those who once sat beside you. The letter Sandra received wasn't long, but every word inside it carried weight. It demanded something impossible, silence in exchange for privacy. Whoever sent it claimed to have messages, unseen photos, and recordings from months ago. The tone was calm, not desperate, and that made it worse. It meant whoever wrote it knew exactly what they were doing. Keanu came over that night. The house was quiet, the air heavy. He sat across from her as she placed the letter on the table. He read it slowly, then looked up with calm eyes. "They want fear," he said softly. "So we don't give it to them." But Sandra's hands trembled slightly. What if they twist everything again? She whispered. What if they make us look like we've been lying all this time? Keanu leaned forward, his tone steady. Truth doesn't stop being truth just because someone distorts it. We can't live to correct every lie. Those words should have comforted her, but this time they only deepened her worry. She wasn't afraid for herself, she was afraid for him. Fame had never broken Keanu because he lived away from it. But she knew the media could turn even calmness into a target. They agreed to wait before taking action. But waiting is its own kind of torture. Every sound felt like a warning. Every shadow, a reminder of what might come next. Days passed. Sandra barely slept. Keanu stayed close, quietly checking in without pressure. Sometimes they sat together without words, the silence between them carrying more than conversation ever could. Then, one evening, while Keanu was heading home from a small film meeting, a journalist approached him with a strange question. "Mr. Reeves, is it true someone's trying to blackmail you and Mrs. Bullock?" Keanu froze for a second, not out of fear, but calculation. He hadn't told anyone about the letter. How did this reporter know? He didn't answer. He simply said, "I don't respond to rumor," and walked away. But inside, he knew something was wrong. Later that night, he called Sandra. She picked up on the first ring. "They know," he said. Her breath caught. "How?" "Someone inside your circle, maybe," he said quietly. Someone who had access. The realization hit her hard. Only a handful of people had seen her private messages. Her assistant, her publicist, a few close friends. The idea that one of them might have betrayed her felt like being cut in a place that doesn't bleed, but still hurts. They decided to meet the next morning at a quiet diner outside the city. Sandra arrived early, her mind restless. When Keanu walked in, she noticed his calmness again. It wasn't denial, it was control. "We can't fight shadows," he said, sitting down. "But we can stand in light," she frowned. "What do you mean?" "We tell the truth before someone else sells it," he said simply. The idea scared her. Going public meant losing control of privacy forever, but hiding meant giving power to the wrong people. After a long pause, she nodded. "Then we do it together." A few days later, they recorded a short interview. No drama, no stage lighting, just two people sitting side by side in a small studio. The interviewer, a kind woman known for empathy rather than gossip, began gently. "There's been a lot said about your friendship," she said. "So I'll ask you both directly, what is it really about?" Keanu smiled faintly, his voice steady. "It's about care. We've both lived through enough loss to know what matters. We don't owe the world an explanation, but we owe the truth to ourselves. We've supported each other through silence, through noise, through misunderstanding. If people want to call that love, they can. But to us, it's just honesty." Sandra looked at him, her eyes glistening. "It's not about labels," she added. "It's about peace. And sometimes peace looks like two people who refuse to give up on kindness." The interview aired that evening. It spread quickly, not because it was scandalous, but because it was pure. People saw authenticity instead of performance. Fans shared clips calling it a masterclass in grace. The narrative shifted from gossip to admiration. But even as the world softened, the betrayal still lingered. The sender of the letter hadn't been exposed yet. Keanu's team quietly traced the origin. The results shocked them. It wasn't a journalist or stranger. It was someone from within Sandra's extended management circle, someone she had worked with for years. When she found out, she went silent. Betrayal, when it comes from those you trust, doesn't make noise. It breaks something quietly inside you. She didn't confront the person publicly. Instead, she let the truth come out naturally through legal channels. Keanu stood by her throughout, never speaking a harsh word, never feeding the chaos. One night, after the situation settled and the truth was out, Sandra sat on her balcony, the city glowing below. Keanu joined her with 2 cups of tea. "You handled that better than anyone could," he said. She smiled faintly. "I just stopped fighting for control." "It's exhausting," he nodded. "Sometimes the best way to win is not to play their game." The quiet between them was peaceful again, but different now. They had faced something together that could have broken them, and instead, it bound them deeper. Then, without warning, Sandra whispered something she had never said aloud before. "You know, all these months I kept waiting for this to break us. But maybe it was never meant to break us. Maybe it was meant to show what's real?" Keanu looked at her, his calm eyes reflecting the city lights. "Then let's not waste what's real," he said softly. She nodded, her heart beating faster than her words could form. For the first time, the line between friendship and something deeper blurred completely. They sat there until the night turned quiet, until their silence became more honest than any confession. But as the dawn began to rise, a phone call shattered the calm once more. This time, not from the media, not from betrayal, but from something none of them expected. Keanu's sister had fallen seriously ill. The news hit him like a wave he didn't see coming. His calm cracked for the first time in months. Sandra reached out, holding his hand tightly. "You're not going through this alone," she whispered. And in that single moment, everything changed again. The story that began with fame was now turning into one about family, mortality, and what truly remains when everything else fades. When love finally spoke. Do you know what happens when life tests the only calm you have left? Do you know how a person changes when someone they love begins to fade? Sometimes, the deepest truths are not spoken. They are lived in silence. Keanu's sister's illness came like a shadow that grew overnight. One day she was fine. The next, she was in the hospital with a diagnosis that sounded heavier than the doctor's calm voice could make it seem. He had faced loss before, but this time was different. This time, he wasn't alone. Sandra was there through every long night, through every quiet hospital hallway where machines hummed and time slowed down. She didn't bring grand gestures, only presence. The kind that doesn't ask for words, only trust. Sometimes she would sit beside him for hours, neither speaking nor leaving, just holding space for him to breathe. Keanu rarely showed emotion, but there were moments when his mask cracked, when he'd lower his head, his shoulders heavy, his eyes distant. Sandra would gently touch his hand and whisper, "You don't have to be strong all the time." He'd look at her then, with that same deep calm that had carried both of them through storms, and say, "But if I stop being strong, who will hold the silence?" "I will," she replied softly. Weeks passed. Treatment continued. The doctor said there was hope, but not certainty. Keanu stayed at his sister's side, his world narrowing to the hospital walls and the quiet prayers he never said aloud. Sandra became his anchor, bringing food, reminding him to rest, reminding him that life still existed outside that pain. One evening, as they sat outside the hospital under the soft orange light of sunset, Keanu spoke quietly. "You know, I used to think peace was about being alone," he said. "But now I think peace is about who you can be silent with and still feel understood." Sandra smiled gently. "Then maybe silence has found its home." He looked at her then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't the excitement of new love. It was the quiet recognition of something that had always been there. Days turned into weeks. Keanu's sister began showing signs of recovery. The relief was quiet, cautious, but real. For the first time in months, Keanu smiled again. Not for the cameras, not for politeness, but for life. One night, after visiting hours ended, he and Sandra walked to the parking lot. The air was cool, the world around them still. As they reached the car, Sandra stopped and turned to him. "You once said we shouldn't let the world define what's real," she said softly. "So tell me now, without the cameras, without the noise, what is this?" Keanu stood still for a moment, his breath fogged in the night air. He looked at her, and his calm voice carried more emotion than it ever had before. "It's real," he said simply. "It's everything I never thought I'd find again." She didn't respond with words. She just stepped closer and rested her head on his chest. The silence between them spoke everything. From that night onward, something changed. They didn't announce anything, didn't label what they had. But the world could see it in the way they moved. Side by side, calm, grounded, without the performance that fame demands. Months later, during a charity event to raise funds for families affected by illness, Keanu stood on stage to speak. Sandra sat in the audience watching him quietly. He began with a simple line that caught everyone's attention. "There are people who walk into your life and make you believe in kindness again," he said. "They remind you that peace isn't the absence of struggle. It's the presence of someone who stays when the world walks away." The crowd applauded, but Sandra's eyes filled with tears. She knew those words weren't part of any script. They were his truth. After the event, they stepped outside, away from the noise, into the cool night air. Sandra looked at him, smiling softly. "You know they'll write 1,000 stories about us again after that speech," he smiled. "Let them. This time, they'll finally be writing something true." Years later, when people spoke about Keanu and Sandra, they didn't talk about scandals or gossip anymore. They spoke about grace, loyalty, and quiet strength. They spoke about two people who refused to let fame rewrite something sacred, and for those who watched closely, the story of their closeness became something bigger than love. It became a lesson. That sometimes the strongest relationships are built not in moments of excitement, but in the quiet choices to stay, to listen, to care when no one else does. Because in the end, what everyone noticed wasn't just how close Keanu and Sandra had become, it was how they made closeness look like peace, and peace, once found, doesn't need explanation.